These things you want to keep in the back of your mind whenever you're in car setup screens or changing them up for yourself, so you don't get overwhelmed and lost by its complexity. And these guidelines are gonna help you make better decisions, save you a lot of time, and they will make sure you're not overwhelming yourself. I will make examples about this in Assetto Corsa Competizione, but you can also apply this to a lot of other sims probably. I was in the setup screens and testing out for hundreds of hours, and you probably will find some benefits in these guidelines. Let's get to the first one, and let me know in the comments in the end of the video if I missed one, because adding something to this list can only be a benefit, yeah? The first thing that's going to be vital is that you have a healthy amount of obsession for car setups, your desire to change them yourself. If you don't care about setups, don't bother. I've put a link down below in the video, Coach Dave Academy. They have setups for every track and car combinations. It's a no-brainer. Or check out my level setups in the Patreon store. I also put a link over there as well. These are setups for the Ferrari, Aston Martin. I put the Audi there at some point, and there's also the McLaren, and I put different levels there for you to progress into. So level 1 will be beginner, and then more pointier setups will be level 2, 3, 4, 5. Check them out below up to the first point. Some cars in the game are just weird and broken. No matter what setup changes you do, you will always find it to not work in certain ways. It's important to note that you don't destroy the pace of the car using super weird setup changes. That's gonna cost you pace. So at some point you also need to accept, for a 992 for instance, that you have this massive weight on the back and you can not tune that out. Yeah, you cannot place the engine in a different place, unfortunately. Guideline number 2. You might drive a car a whole season and then you pivot to the next car a season, and you know, oh yeah, because on the Audi I put the anti-roll bar a bit stiffer, so this is also gonna work great in a Ferrari. Some sliders will have a massive effect on one car, and then on the other car you don't even notice any difference. And that brings us to the third point. Don't mistake a slider for its percentage or think about them linearly. So let's say you have a preload or a differential setting and it says 20%, 40%, or it says 20 Newton meters preload or 100. This looks like a factor 5, but don't think about them linearly. Sometimes an anti-roll bar setting from 50% or 75% will not do the job, and if you put it on the maximum, then all of a sudden you got the desired result. So sometimes it looks like 1, 2 or 4 or whatever. You get the idea, yeah? When tuning out car behavior, you want to stick to your force feedback settings, you want to stick to a certain benchmark track, you want to stick to fuel levels, track conditions, keep them the same, especially for the steer ratios. Just pick one and then tune from there, so you get rid of all this variance that can also change car behavior. So the last one was the fourth one. This is going to be the fifth guideline. That is going to be build a preset. So let's say you pick a car for a season. I always recommend picking cars for a season, stick with them, learn them. You're going to have a certain baseline, let's say a low or high downforce setting, and then you're gonna copy all these setups to all these different tracks, and you're gonna have some sort of a baseline where you feel comfortable in, and now you already have an 80 or a 70% ish preset for every track you drive. And this is gonna save you a massive amount of time, because you have a baseline setup that you are changing for this track conditions that you're gonna drive it on. Guideline number 6. Don't spend 3 million hours and laps on one track for one setup. I found if I get a setup that is working for me for 80%, do races, because in the races the flaws of the car or the problems that it might have will be exaggerated in races, and you can also compare your setup and your car behavior with other cars on track. It is absolutely like, obviously you can spend a million hours on one track, one day, one practice session, but I would just do this like half hour, 45 minutes, and then I would hit track and do races and then do some minor tweaks to get it even more to your liking. Guideline number 7. There is an argument that we need the proper tire temperatures, we need proper pressures in the perfect window, and then only can we change the setup. But I think if you obviously you want the tires in the perfect windows and you want to have a nice car in that behavior, that's going to be optimal. But also know that if you cannot control your car in an outlap, or it's very dangerous in an outlap, you might make some tweaks because the conditions will not always be perfect. Sometimes you just screw up some tire pressure, or the race start you don't get the chance to heat up the tires that properly. You want to have a proper outlap. That's the rule, probably. You want to have a proper outlap. This will predict also a great setup. If you lose it immediately on an outlap, in my opinion, your setup is not optimal. Guideline number 8. You want to test out your setup on worn tires. So let's say if you're doing a practice session, now this is Assetto Corsa Competizione, every time you go on track and you go back to the pit and you drive out again, the game gives you new tires. But I would recommend and put a memo piece of text on your computer saying pick the old tires and wear them out and see how your car is behaving on worn tires, especially if you're going to do longer stints with your setup. This is going to really predict how it's going to behave when the tires are wearing, and maybe you can change accordingly from that so you don't have this horrible moments when you're in the end of the stint. And every Porsche driver kind of knows what I'm talking about here. Guideline number 9. Don't mistake understeer for missing your braking points or just asking too much or trying to push too hard. Let's say your car, you're braking too late or you're missing your apexes all the time. Don't mistake that for understeer. Obviously, for car setup building, you need somewhat of a consistent driving style so you can actually feel and see the changes. Guideline number 10. Pick wing settings, change up the ride heights, change up the bump stop ranges, wheel rates and anti-roll bar settings. These things are going to make 75% of your car setup. If you need ridiculous amounts of toe values or brake biases, reconsider the first 4 points that I made in this 10th guideline, because I really feel if you need a ridiculous amount of rear toe to keep your car under control, there might be some other issues with your setup. Obviously, there will always be an exception for this guideline, but just know that like working from some sort of a baseline will keep you away from extreme values here and there. Guideline number 11. You want to pick one metric at a time when changing car setups. Yeah, so changing the toe, all right, do a few laps, then change up something else. Don't do everything at once. I'm still guilty of this. I really think like, oh, I'm gonna change this, I'm gonna change that, then I'm gonna change that, then I'm gonna do some laps, and I'm wondering which slider is creating this effect. Was it the camber? Was it the brake bias? Was it the traction control? Or was it maybe the rear wing setting? You see what I mean? Guideline number 12. Gaining lap time. Gaining car control with your own changes in your car setup is the most satisfying feeling ever. It's so satisfying that I'm basically building a YouTube channel around it. I also believe as a sim racer you're gonna grow and find pace better as well, because you know your car, you know the system behind it, how your inputs are going to be affected from suspension and airflow onto the tires and the tarmac. Change them up yourself will give you durable fulfillment in sim racing. And this might be even the most important one. Save them. Save your setups and name them accordingly. Also, when you're changing up different values, keep some sort of a hint in these setup names, so you know, oh, here over here I put some extra wing, oh, over here we have some less traction control. I'm still trying to find a way to give them the proper names, but the most frustrating thing is like when you had a great setup, you had a great race, and then you open up the setup screen again, loading up the setup, and you see like 270 different types of setups with all these different weird names everywhere, and I'm like, shit, which was the setup that was working so well? You know what I mean? So also let me know in the comments, what do you think of these guidelines? Maybe there's one missing. I would really have your input. I read all the comments, so help me out, yeah, because I have really a problem with these names, calling them, yeah. How do you do it? Also want to thank the supporters massively, and if you really want to get a grasp on car setups and you want to know some mechanics behind it, you want to watch this video where I explain how the aerodynamic force is taking over the mechanical grip section from your car when you go into higher speeds, and that one we will place right up here. See you in the next one.